Hey, beautiful people, welcome to the One Wildlife podcast with me, Abbie Barnes. We are here at the end of 2022, and I have finally got round to finalizing the episodes. That's a lot of finallys in one sentence, isn't it? That I recorded with some beautiful guests earlier this year in 2022. In fact, some of them were recorded in May, including this episode with Chaz. Now, that is simply because life has thrown so much my way. It has been an epic year, and I can't wait to share more with you about that on my YouTube channel. But before we dive into today's episode with Chaz, I just want to say I'm keeping these podcast episodes ad-free by having them completely powered by my community. So I run a Patreon platform. Patreon is a platform for creators to basically enable us to keep on creating content for free for you guys. And if you would like to support me and subscribe to my Patreon channel, it is patreon.com/spend more time in the wild. Join that community, get stuck in. There's so much going on. People all around the world connecting and sharing their passions for the big wide world and adventure. The other thing I will say is if you have a guest that you would like me to have a conversation with, then please hit me up on admin@spendmoretimeinthewild.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get down to it and have a chat with Chaz. Adventure means different things to different people. An adventure for some could mean going for a dip in an icy tarn or riding a mountain bike down a gnarly home run. For others, it could be climbing a mountain for the first time, or facing a long-term fear of some sort. For explorer and expedition leader Chaz Powell, adventure has become a way of life that has seen him walk the length of some of Africa's wildest rivers and create a way of life that embraces nature and sustainable living. Along the way, Chaz has sought to highlight the devastating realities of wildlife crime and conservation issues across the globe. Now, for his work, Chaz has been awarded with the honorary title of Explorer of the Year by the Scientific Exploration Society in 2021 and is a Fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. Today, we have the exciting opportunity to talk with Chaz about his explorations and missions to create positive change. So, without further ado, Chaz, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Abbie. Thank you for having me on. You're good?
Yeah, all good here, thank you. So good to be having this conversation here. Where are you tuning in from today?
Well, pretty much the very northern point of the UK, near Dunnet Head. I've got a bit of land that's, it's about 4 miles from there, the very northeast corner of Scotland, but yeah, in the middle of nowhere as such, but yeah, nice little place.
Oh wow, it certainly is a beautiful landscape up there. So different from the rest of the country, I find. Last year we did a big cycling expedition and we started at John O'Groats and Dunnet Head, which is reasonably close to where you are. And for listeners, I have to say that when I was up there, it just felt so stark and wild and remote, otherworldly almost. So Chaz, before we actually dive into your story, I'd love to know what it is that drew you to this wild place.
Yeah, talking of wind, you can probably hear little bits of swirling about. It's going on now as well. The wind was the only thing that I guess is the sticking point here. But I think I probably told you in the past, but since I can remember, I've all I wanted to do was buy some land and sort of go off grid and try and live, sustainable off the land, but also in a way of probably how I would if I was traveling. You know what I mean? I'm sort of in the middle of nature. I've got incredible sort of stuff around me. The Northern Lights is up here in the north. You've got deer grazing on the grass outside when I wake up in the morning. There's birds flying around. There's forests. There's lochs. There's mountains. I can see all this from my doorstep. And I think just since I can remember, all I wanted to do is do that. I never wanted to have a house in the middle of a street with everyone else, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but for me, I never wanted to go down that route. And also up here, I could afford to do this. I could buy the land outright. I never wanted to have a mortgage. I never wanted any kind of tie down. And I've got an old derelict croft on the land, and the aim is to sort of renovate that and over time, no rush with it. I've got a little cabin on the land. I've got other buildings. I've got about an acre of land. I'm surrounded by farms, farmland, fields. There's forests. I can see the ocean. I can see the locks. I can see, it's just, there's a mixture of things, why I've chose this. But I looked for plots of land for years and years and years. And I think the pandemic was another reason, living in a van for years, obviously traveling abroad and coming back, living in a van and not really having anywhere secure to live. I got frowned upon, obviously, when I lived in a van during lockdowns. And I think as soon as it gave me a kick up the backside to say, right, I'm going to buy some land and I'm going to do it, because I've been saying it for 20 years now. And obviously travel's always come first. I've always traveled, and which is partly one of the only downside, is I'm one of these people now that's got I've got something. I've never had something, and I've got some kind of tie down in a way, but I'm trying not to look at it like that. This is why I didn't want any mortgage or anything like that. I just wanted to feel free. That's the main thing.
Living free, I like that. I think that's certainly something we can all strive to do more of. Actually, I'd be really interested. I guess I'm very curious on a personal note. Do you have any sort of boundaries or perimeters that you follow for yourself that keep you living close to nature? Or do you sort of just base a day based upon how you feel?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a set criteria and all that business. But when the thing I've realized the most is just how I feel naturally when I step outside. And I just, every day I'm wowed by something on the land, and I can see, even just flocks of birds flying over, and the cows coming up to the wall, sort of like, sort of looking at me as one of their own. Sounds strange. And then I don't know, just being here is just the realization that I feel connected to the land instead of actually trying to sort of get something from it. It's just like a natural feeling that I'm connected to this place. And I feel like I'm not around civilization, and it's a bit like a therapy center in a way. I've been up here for a year on my own pretty much, and a couple of chickens, and I just notice everything. I notice all the little things around, all the changing of the season has been incredible. The wild weather, like the wind and the snow, and the dark long, short days, and the light long days. But I think criteria wise, I'm obviously straying away from the question a little bit, but I think I just wanted to feel connected to the land, maybe a sense of community. The neighbors that are nearby, I'm saying nearby, there's about half a mile away, but they're all friendly. It's all community based, and I can go to my neighbor's house and they'll know me, who I am. They'll invite me in for a cup of tea. It's just like that. It's a sense of community here, which is one of the things I wanted. I wanted to feel like I was in the wild. I've obviously spent a lot of time in Africa, and I'm always in the wild there. And being in that position in the UK is not an easy sort of aim, really. So I think just having something in the middle of nowhere was one of the things I wanted to feel like I was maybe disconnected from an environment that was really chaotic and sort of, like maybe like a city, for example. I wanted the complete opposite to that. I wanted to feel like I was connected to a place, which is what I feel here. And just obviously the little things like the views, the sort of natural stuff around me. Even now I'm looking at, I can see this big heron flying over, and it's just always something, there's always something that catches my eye. And obviously the organic way as well. I wanted to be sustainable. That's probably the number one aim behind it, is I don't want to rely on any outside source. I want to grow food. I want to harvest the solar, the electricity, maybe the wind, harvest rainwater collection for water, maybe dig a well and have that, and grow food, obviously what I said before. But start from scratch. No real rush with it as well. I don't want to say, oh, I've got to do it all now. I want to just take my time and but yeah, it's just I can see, you know what I mean as well. You got the reasons behind, as far as just just embracing it and being in a wild environment. And this is what I say before, like, maybe a similar life to how I am when I'm traveling. This is all the stuff I want when I'm on an expedition or a hike. I want to feel like I'm out in the wild, I'm free, I'm seeing incredible things all the time, and I'm yeah, meeting people, etc. Obviously not as much here, obviously got the community aspect, the neighbors, but yeah, it's just yeah, does that answer the question? Yeah.
Absolutely. You're really speaking my language here. For me, I'm a hiker, and I've been trying over the last few years to bring the character and personality I am when I'm on the trail back to day to day life. But at times, it feels like I'm two different people. And as you say, it's like normal life is so filled with stresses and worries, and yet when you're out on adventures, it can feel so grounding and calming. But it sounds like you've forged a way to balancing that out for yourself, which I think is actually really admirable, because connection with nature is something we're all in deficit of and with. Sort of in the 21st century, it's a big problem, the lack of connection with nature. So, with that in mind, this connection with the natural world, where did that begin for you, and how did that morph into adventures and expeditions, particularly in Africa? Where did that interest spark from?
Uh, yeah, I think when I think back to when I was young, I wasn't really academic, or I didn't really want to be in an environment where I was controlled, which it isn't always the case, but that's how I felt as a young person. I felt like I'm in school, I want to be outside, all that sort of, that maybe a bit of ADHD or something. I was always like, oh, I want to get out, a bit like bit very restless, especially in my mind. I was always wandering off, daydreaming about, going off and doing stuff. And this is when I'm a kid, obviously. And I think the only thing that resonated with me as a child was doing Duke of Edinburgh and little things like that. I really enjoyed that. And I was in cadets as a kid, and I was always going to join the military. That was always going to be the thing I was going to do as a young person. And the realization it was, I didn't want to be regimented, or I didn't want to obviously go out and shoot people, etc., which is obviously part and parcel potentially, So I decided against that, and I didn't really have any aims or objectives about what I wanted in life. I didn't want a career. And I remember just when I left to go traveling when I was in my early 20s, I'd worked at Butlins for a few years, and I didn't go to university or anything like that. And I was a bit of a troublesome teen as well, very restless, like I say. And I ended up going traveling, and that traveling didn't really end for 8 years. I just, got the bug, and I just kept traveling. And even then I was like, oh, I was always thinking about, do I actually want to do anything? Do I want to work? All I want to do is go hiking, and all I want to do is travel and explore. And for that 8 years, I expanded my mind so much, embracing cultures, different environments, different ways of life, sort of, yeah, just opening my mind to a massive scale. And I obviously also grew up a lot as well during that time. I was quite an idiotic, probably a teenager, as a lot of teenagers are quite restless and whatnot. But I grew up a lot in that time, and I realized what I wanted to do. And it was probably around the time I met you. Obviously, I started that teaching bushcraft, but also I'd obviously followed the path to become a mountain leader, and the aim was to try and be an expedition leader. That's the only job I realized that I wanted to do, really. And so that was a progression, 8 years of travel to come back to realize I wanted to be an expedition leader. But the end of that 8 years, basically, my travel had evolved from backpacking, just sort of doing anything, no real objective, to having an objective to, in sort of travel in a way that was wilder, So I was going to national parks, I was doing treks, I was volunteering at wildlife sanctuaries, I was really immersing myself into the wild side of travel, which not necessarily having done before. And the back end of that, I traveled from Nairobi to Cape Town on an overland trip. And that trip was basically about visiting national parks, just really sort of getting into the wild, and always passionate about wildlife and wildlife conservation, the wrongdoings to wildlife in the world. That was always something I was really passionate about. And I think the progression after I'd finished that ended that travel, to decide to do a mountain leader and start teaching, and also the passion for wildlife. It all stemmed into this, the wildest journey, which is obviously the recent project I've done. And the aim was to, well, the initial aim, I'd always done a lot of travel, but I'd never done a really wild journey by foot for a long time in a really wild environment. And the wildest place I could think of was the Zambezi. You know, the areas I traveled, the Zambezi River was like really wild, rugged, you know, unknown in a way. You know, there was a lot of stories like myths and, you know, sort of hearsay about areas like, oh, witchcraft, danger, blah, blah, blah. And I was always like fascinated by this. You know, even when I was younger, I was always read stories of exploration by Livingston and Stanley and Speke and all these different people that had, you know, gone to find the source of the Nile. And I looked at Africa in a way of anywhere in the world I'd been, it was probably one of the places that changed very little to them times. You know, the environment's still very wild. It's still quite hostile, and yeah, excited me. And obviously, once I'd done the Zambezi, I'd broadened my comfort zone to a whole new level, and continued with that theme. You know, it's only the last few years I haven't traveled. Like I say, I got the award in 2021 last year, and that was the back end of doing a lot of big African expeditions, from walking across Madagascar and doing the Gambia River by foot, and all these treks that no one had ever done and no one knew much about the areas, you know. And my objective was to obviously do that, but also have a really wild adventure, and this on the side of it, obviously, to research wildlife habitat loss and you know, species declination or whatever it is, and just really yeah, it's got at hand. But then this off-grid project, you know, one of the things I miss a little bit is now not, you know, I feel like I'm here and I've been here, like I say, for a year, and I'm definitely craving Africa and all these adventures again. And however long that will, you know, I can stay put in one area is always going to be the question mark. You know, it's always going to be like, yes, I love it here, but is it going to be the first for adventure is always there, you know?
Oh my gosh, I resonate with that so much. You know, it's that sort of nomadic drive that you find somewhere that's perfect, you settle down, you're very happy and content on land, but then no matter what, this urge to get out and explore new places just seems to come. It's like a shadow that partners with our cellular self. So yeah, totally with you on that one. But I think this really speaks to your humble character. You know, it's lovely hearing about some of these adventures, but really only scratching the surface in terms of detail. Like, oh yeah, I just walked across Madagascar. Oh yeah, just walked the length of the Zambezi. It's just brilliant. You know, you mentioned there as well that these are remote and potentially quite hostile, dangerous expeditions. So in order to help the listener who, you know, maybe on their commute to work or at the gym or somewhere like that, help them understand, and myself as well, to comprehend the size of these expeditions, where would you direct the conversation in terms of the entry point to understanding the scale of what you've undertaken here? How do you go about planning such a trip? Is it literally you get Google Maps up and you sort of zoom in and start to make notes from that, or talking to people on the ground? Like, where do you start with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long, drawn-out process, obviously, for me. As far as I'd done many of the little walks, I'd started off years and years before walking the West Highland Way as my first sort of long-distance trail, and then just walked a lot of the UK's trails in that sense. And I think I got to the stage, obviously, after traveling for such a long time, that I was ready for something more. You know, I'd obviously stretched my comfort zone. So I think like that was a big part of it. I knew that I was ready for something a bit more, you know, within myself, mentally, knew I could take it. And I think like on expedition, when I've been with other people, not mentioning names and whatever it is, but when you can see, even on expedition school groups, you know, you can see that some people aren't quite comfortable. And to get to that mental, you know, capability of being comfortable with it and accepting that it's going to be a difficult journey, you know, and actually enjoying that is the main thing, because the reality of it isn't always as enjoyable, is it? You know, and you get out there and the weather's changed, you know, there's hostility. So I think mentally knowing that you can do it is number one for me. You know, it's always going to get you through, isn't it? If you're mentally strong and you know you can do it. And the practicalities, you know, I had to research the weather patterns, and I had to research different areas where I knew I might not be able to get through, or there's going to be potential dangers, and maybe I need permits. You know, I'm constantly researching, and getting the maps out is the most incredible bit. Obviously, you're looking at where you're going to go, and then you're figuring out key points of interest or really sticky points that, you know, maybe I can't get. I've got to go through this border and blah blah blah. And I think just a lot of research, but that's always part of the excitement, isn't it? You know, researching it, getting it planned, and most part, you know, that, like I say, that the areas I walk through, there's still very little known about them, and you know, we're talking back from a couple of 100 years ago when other people were exploring, and you know, they'd report back, you know, there's not much change in a sense. You know, people still live off the land in these wild areas. They just get the fish out of the river. They've got a house made out of straw that's going to last a lifetime, then it'll disappear, you know, and they've got their family. They don't know any different. They haven't got all these fancy gadgets, and that is still as it would have been, you know. That's what I loved about it as well. I'm passing through areas where I'm just part of the environment in a way, which is the same as what the people are. And so I think you've got to mentally be able to take it. You've got to be able to sort of know that it's going to be difficult. So that mental side, obviously research, the weather, the people, the terrain, the environments, the problems, you know, the get out, you know, how are you going to get out them problems, you know, insurance, satellite phones. You got to have a support bit. I've never had any kind of support or anything like that. So I've always had to know I am my own support. You know, I've got my first aid kit. I've got my satellite phone. I've got my GPS, my mapping, my little letters, which are in different languages. Maybe I can get through areas, and I got to go and speak to different people. And yeah, I've always got an armory of information, or, you know, what I need. And but majority of it, you know, when you're out there, like I went off the tangent a bit there, but as far as just getting out there, there's not little known about these areas, and the fact that you'll have to just wing it, you know, you'll have to just wing it for the most part. You'll have to get out there and like, what's going to happen? Every day is a new day, you know, what's going to happen today? I've got to get through that. And that was it. I took it like a few days at a time. I'd sit down with my map. I'd say, right, how am I going to get through this area? You know, I'm going to get from this point to this point. What am I looking at here? I'm looking at some dense jungle. Maybe I'm walking through swamps here. You know, maybe I'm going into a real hostile area. I've got to really think about it. And so many times I was diverting from either the river or the people or the wildlife. You know, there was always something that wanted to kill me or give me problems, and it's a game of yeah, it's like a chess puzzle, but it's a really interesting one. And yeah, I quite like it. I think obviously yourself, we quite like these things, don't we?
Chess puzzle, yeah, that's a good analogy. It definitely does feel like a little bit of a game at times, or can do. So how long did this trip take, and how much ground did you cover?
The Zambezi. So the Zambezi was 4.5 months. But I did it in 2 sections of Zambezi, because in the first year I did it, I walked 2,000 kilometers over 97 days. And the reason I had to stop them was because of the civil war in Mozambique. And I'd already nearly died a few times before that. And obviously it was a bit of a wake-up call. I had to stop for several months and then continue the Mozambique section. Even then it was dangerous. But yeah, it was 137 days in total, for about 3,000 kilometers, about 2,000 mile distance covered. But yeah, it was 3 stone lost, you know, and big bushy beard and stuff like that. It was a bit of a, yeah, it was a long one. But I mean, even when I look back at it, I'd love to do something double that, you know. I'd love to do, you know, a year, or, you know, 9 months, or at least, you know, something big. And yeah, the Congo or the Nile, or, you know, all this stuff excites me, and it's all sort of on the back of my mind all the time, you know. Like, I've done the Zambezi, yeah, it was good, it was incredible, and it was a lot, you know. 5 months is a long time, 4.5 months, but I wouldn't mind just keep going, you know, for a couple of years.
That's it, around the world. Why not? You listed off a few rivers there. Is there a reason why you're particularly drawn to these bodies of water? Or is it simply because they're helpful navigational aids? Or is there something else entirely?
It started off like, well, I'd done the River Severn and a couple of other little rivers before I did the Zambezi, and I didn't really think too much of it. And I thought about the Zambezi. I think I was inspired by other people. There was a sense of that. I was inspired by past exploration, people that had explored rivers, and Leveson Wood doing the Nile and Ed Stafford doing the Amazon. There was elements of that which I was inspired by. But then since I started doing the river adventures, I've realized, you've got this tiny little beginning and it grows into this massive ending, the source to the ocean. And that environment passes through so many different communities, cultures, wild environments. The landscape's changing all the time, and people rely on them rivers. They rely on them for the life, the water, the navigation, the transport, the livelihoods, everything is relied upon by the rivers, and the wildlife do the same. They're the life veins of Africa, especially. And I think that you can see it's the ultimate journey for me, rivers. And I love walking across anything, mountain ranges and any wild environment, but rivers, there's a humble little beginning and a mighty ending, and it is so dramatic, and I'm sure but it's just your ultimate journey. And I think there's an element of it where, I know I've done quite a few rivers, and I know there's other environments to explore, but rivers do draw me back. And especially in Africa, there's something quite iconic about them and fascinating to me. And it's also, I guess I've picked up a little bit of a niche by doing it as well, in a selfish way, I suppose. But yeah, but I'm always craving stuff. Recently I walked across the Orkney and Shetland Islands. I'm always trying to spice it up. So I'm always doing little other things, but I think my ultimate journey is to do a big river, spend several months by the river. And yes, there is easy aspects that you're following in a navigation age. You've got the river that's going to guide you, and you've got water from the river. There's that aspect, and you can have a wash, sometimes when the crocodiles aren't there. And you've got there's normally communities along there as well, so you can stock up food. There's always, rivers are good, they're really interesting places.
100%. So you finished the Zambezi. What came next? I know there was another expedition between the Zambezi and your trek across Madagascar. So fill us in with that middle section there and where you ended up.
Yeah, so the Zambezi, the end of that one, I was joined by another guy for a couple of weeks on the end section of the Zambezi, and he actually put it in my mind. He said, have you looked at the Gambia River? He says, oh, that's a fascinating little river. And I hadn't really looked at it, I hadn't. But then it's always little things like that. I'm on one walk and I'm planning another walk, like you probably yourself. I'm planning another walk, and as soon as he planted that little seed about the Gambia, I remember just being sat somewhere researching the Gambia, and there was Mungo Park who travelled down the Gambia to get to the Niger, and the Niger's a river that's really difficult to get on. It's just dangerous. There's a lot of real dangerous areas there. So it was a similar sort of area to the Niger, the Gambia. It's one of the tributaries, and it's near that area. And it just completely different cultures, completely different environments, completely different challenge, but on a bit of a smaller scale to the Zambezi. So I felt like it was a doable expedition, and I wanted a follow up to the Zambezi as well. It had been a couple of years since I completed that, and I fancied another river, and the Gambia River was the next one, and that was I look back on it as being quite a small journey, but it was 47 days. It was 1,200 kilometers, so it was quite a big walk, but it seemed to go quite quick because I think I just enjoyed it, and it was English speaking countries, it was French, and it was just a nice walk, the Gambia.
Almost like a bit of a holiday for you.
Yeah, it's like a holiday. But that was it, like the Zambezi. When I finished the Zambezi, I was on like you expect this palm-laden beach, saying, well, this beautiful, opposite. I was walking through mangroves, and I ended up on this swampy beach, and I got stuck, and I had to flag these fishermen down to get me off, and it was just a nightmare. Traveled for 3 days back up the river to try and get to any civilization. But the Gambia, we finished there. We were in Banjul, and there was bars and beaches, and it's just like, get a beer straight away, celebrate, and it was just, hotel for the week, put our feet up, complete opposite to the Zambezi, but there was wild parts of the Gambia, so it wasn't like an easy river to walk. There was one of the biggest lion parks in West Africa in that area we had to get through, and real Guinea Conakry was a country that was so humbling and really remote. We had to walk a lot, just little paths. There was no roads really, and real sort of small communities everywhere, and really culturally very interesting place. And yeah, lots of elements to that river. There was a lot of mining, gold mining, which you found out, obviously the wildlife side of it, a lot of real pollution in the rivers, and yeah, a lot of strange times along there. A lot of real there's a lot of history along the Gambia. Slavery and stuff like that was rife in especially the Gambia itself, huge slave markets, and this all has a ripple effect on the country as well. It all still resonates with people. There's a lot of that's difficult when you're walking through these areas. You can obviously see signs of the past, and whether or not these these wounds are healed. It's always a very difficult area and sensitive area to walk through as well. A lot of Africa, but yeah, it's nice. It was a nice walk. Doesn't sound a good way to say it, like a wild environment, to say it's a nice walk, does it?
I think it just depends on what you're used to. I'm really excited to steer this conversation to the wildlife element of what you're sort of up to and why. But before we go, fill us in on the expedition we've mentioned a few times, which was walking across Madagascar. How did this trip come about, and what did it play out like for you?
Yeah, so Madagascar, once again, it was something that sort of like a little spark that created the idea to walk across Madagascar. I'd done because I'm a Craghoppers ambassador, I did a day at Chester Zoo, which was walking with kids in the lemur sanctuary, and it was like a day out with Chaz Powell. It's quite cheesy, but really, really interesting day, and really, really nice to be involved with it. And it was a bit like doing a bit of survival, and I'd taken through the lemur sanctuary, and it was like a Madagascar themed, obviously day. And I just remember, I think it was like a break time or something. I was on there, and I remember just sat there. I wonder what the longest river is in Madagascar, and I've never looked at it. And then I just saw it, and it was like 3/4 of the width of the country is the Mangoki, and I thought, oh wow, like I could potentially walk that. And it's just a lot of ideas. Just sat down like a tea break at Chester Zoo, and then I realized, I've started to create this expedition in my head. And I think it was like a couple of days after that, I was planning it. You know what I mean? It was like one idea to then, right, let's get it planned. And I think that Chester Zoo day was in March or April, 2019. And I was out there walking in end of August. You know what I mean? It was just like, I'd put a team together, and I'd created this expedition. But yeah, that was what started it off. And then I just walked it. Yeah.
I'm coming to the realization very quickly that you're just a very humble man. Oh yeah, just another long walk.
Yeah, I mean, it's like yourself though. I can imagine that you get to the stage where you've done it quite a lot, and you enjoy it. It's your comfort zone is actually being on an expedition. You got a sense of that journey, that sense of freedom. And I think you do get a bit blasé about how it actually is, because when I look back on it, I nearly died on these things several times, and I was in so many difficult situations, but at the same time, I don't even think about that. I just think about the journey, and it's part and parcel of it. I'm just like, and I have got blasé, I've got real blasé about it. And even when I'm talking about it, everyone's always like, it doesn't sound like you've walked it, it sounds like you're just skimming over it, and I'm like, well, I could speak about it all day. I could speak about the elements of it all day. And sometimes I can get really deep and quite sad about stuff, to do with it. There's a lot of real emotional highs and lows I went through on these journeys. And I guess I've got a stopper where I don't go into that zone most of the time. I'm always sort of like, yeah, it was a walk. We walked across. There was lions. There was, craziness. It was, but I chose to do these journeys, and I'm always aware of that. And I'm always aware that, I've got to mentally strong. Like it's like as an expedition leader, you're always faced with some little problem, and it's like if you let these little problems annoy you or get to you, then you're going to have a real difficult time. You're not going to enjoy the job, and you're not going to, it's going to real. But I quite enjoy it. I quite enjoy these little logistical problems. Like, how am I going to solve this? Get through this, and coming through the other end of it, you'll appreciate the fact that you have done that, and you appreciate the fact that you've got through it, obviously, and survived. But also, you've got a decent story to tell, because a lot of the times people don't care about the nice stuff, do they? They just want to hear the chaos. So as long as you've got a good list of that, it's a good expedition.
Yeah, it is true. Sharing the juicy stuff. But also, the amount of time you spent on your feet and the stories I imagine you could tell, like, where do you start with that when it comes to giving a presentation or even giving a podcast conversation like this? I can imagine for your own sanity, you have to create a bit of a package and a particular way that you retell things and regurgitate that information. Because otherwise, I'm sure we could be sat here for many, many hours diving in deep with everything that you've experienced. I have to say, I really resonate with that. It's just something you have to do and save the rest for around the fire. But there's one burning question I have right now, and that is, why walking? Why choose your own 2 feet on the ground, then cycling or canoeing or something else? What is it that pulls you to walk?
I think that the element of actually going into the wild can only really be done by foot in a way. Obviously canoeing, yes, but you're on the river all the time. When you're on foot, you go wherever. You'll climb over the mountain, you'll navigate along the rivers, you'll on a bike, obviously that's out of the question. For the most part, you can't really, you're stuck on the road, stuck on the tracks, which is, I can imagine, is quite okay. But for me, it's always been about the wild, getting out there in the most remote area, and hacking through the jungle or walking through the rivers, or, there's always that element of it where I need to be. But the element of discovery and exploration for me is always on foot. If I think of a vision of it, I'm on foot. I'm in these areas. I'm not. I do like the thought of canoeing and being on the river, but at the same time, I think I'd get bored. I think I just want to be doing stuff all the time, off on my feet. And I think, as you know, when you've got the bug for hiking and you can understand why you actually enjoy hiking, then that's part of it. Yes, I'm discovering, I'm exploring, but then the feel good of the hike, the fact that you're out there on your own, you've got everything you need on your bag, on your back. You're camping out in these environments, and sometimes I'm very envious of the canoers. They can just pull up on these little islands and camp out, and they just get off the next day. They can get more in the canoe, they can carry more supplies. There's definitely pros and cons, but I think for me, yeah, being on foot, just being out there is what the biggest draw is for it, and it's what excites me the most. But yeah, maybe now I've got this hernia, which is why if anyone's wondering why I'm sat like this, I've got a hernia. But yeah, maybe now I'm getting a bit older, maybe I'll go into canoeing and stuff like that, and maybe I'll start doing things a bit more slow as I get older. But I think I'll always have a craving to undertake hiking, whether that's on a mountain or through obviously like along rivers. And I think that's it. It's always difficult. It's a bit like in a way, it's a bit like the why question, isn't it? As far as why do you do it? Because it's, inside why you do it, and you know the feeling you get from doing it. But trying to summarize that is always quite tricky, isn't it? But best form of therapy, isn't it? Especially adventure. Adventure is just the ultimate feel good. You can't feel better than that. And I think it all boils down to the fact of, like I said before, about I need to feel free, whether that's on the land. I think the journey I'm on foot is the ultimate freedom. I can't think of anything more free than being out there with my stuff, walking in a wild environment. That's just the ultimate. So that's I guess that's the best answer for it in a way.
100%. In fact, if we were together, never mind. High five. There you go.
There you go.
So I was going to say I'd give you a high five in person, but we can do it through the screen. So you've mentioned there that you faced life and death a number of times, and I wonder, are there any particular stories that you feel like you can share?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the standout stuff. You know, there is a lot, but the little things, I guess, that I learned lessons from, big lessons, it changed me as a person and made me probably respect the environment more, respect myself more for what I can go through and stuff like that. And I think being left alone, I had the 2 years of planning the Zambezi, I was left alone on day one. You know, my guide, he was part and parcel of the planning, you know, just bottled it on day one. And that was one of the biggest, from the very beginning of the journey, I was left on my own, you know, to face the Zambezi River by foot, you know, walking through that. And that was the biggest lesson. Firstly, you know, just being left on my own. Can I still do it on my own? Am I capable of doing this? You know, can I do it now? Someone else has quit, because you're seeing that person quit, and you start to think to yourself, they obviously quit for a reason. This is obviously quite a dangerous expedition, and that getting through that straight away, you know, just saying, right, I'm going to take it a day at a time. I'm going to go, and I was emotional at that point as well, and that was the biggest lesson to begin with. You know, just like knowing that I can get through that setback straight away, and knowing that I can do stuff on my own. And most of the time when you're on your own, you do your own thing, you meet people the way you want to meet people, you take your time, you hurry up, you do whatever you want, you know. And that was a big lesson to begin with. Obviously it was a massive shock, but it was a big lesson, and it was the best thing that could have happened in that sense. I couldn't get into Angola, you know, there was logistical problems with that. I had to walk around the border, constantly warned about witchcraft and people hunting me for my body parts, and real strange stuff, you know, real villages I passed through where they'd never seen a white person, you know, and they'd never seen anyone from outside their village. It was always very strange environments and situations I was put in. And I had to walk across the Barotse floodplain, a 400-mile expanse of flood. You know, I was wading through swamps for weeks, you know, trying to get through areas, and had to keep getting to higher ground and navigating around these real difficult areas, and nearly died in the Zambezi Gorge. This is obviously my biggest story, where I was down in the gorges, and it was the hottest time of year, 50 degrees Celsius, and there was no water anywhere except for in the river, you know, down in the gorge. And I spent a couple of weeks walking in it, got really impatient, realized I was getting nowhere, tried to get out, climbed out the gorge, you know, to try and take a shortcut to another river that I don't know if it existed or not. It might have dried up, but I didn't get to it, because by the time I got out and tried to navigate across the top of the land, I couldn't do it. You know, there was overgrowth, fawns, you know, and they ended up trying to get back down to the river, but because I was in a different area, I couldn't get back down. I was faced with a cliff. Yeah, cut a long story short, in a way, I ended up running out of water. The temperature's 50 degrees, getting really ill, having to find shade, having to ring for help on my satellite phone, SOS. They were trying to get helicopters to me, trying to get help to me. They couldn't get any help to me. I ended up drinking my own urine. You know, I was getting ill, in and out of consciousness. In the end, they said, oh, we can get you a helicopter. It's going to be about 5 hours from this point, where I'd already been ill. I'd already been there for a long time. And I just said to myself, I think I'm going to be dead in 5 hours. You know, I don't feel like I'm going to live. I was so ill that I got up, drank some more urine first, got up, and then went back to this cliff, looked at it in a very different way. And I could see little roots hanging out the side of the cliffside, and little jagged rocks sticking out. And basically, like a free jumper, I just jumped and grabbed onto these roots and scraped myself down. I remember falling probably about 10 or 15 foot, landing on a ledge. I was landing on the side of my leg, and just lying there for like however many seconds, thinking I'd broke my leg, but luckily I hadn't. You know, I got myself up, you know, hobbling off, got to another ledge, kept going, fainted at one point, and then I eventually got down. I was faced with the water like a mirage, dropped in it, you know, drank probably 5 liters of water. Had to sit in the water for about an hour to cool my body down, to really sort of start thinking properly. I couldn't even think, you know, I was like just drained, absolutely drained. And I was still ill, you know, at that point. And I had to sit there for about an hour before I could actually get back on my satellite phone and say, look, I'm back by the river. I don't need help anymore. I'm all right. And from there, I had to walk back several days to get out and find another route across the top of the land. And yeah, a big search party was there waiting for me. That was really crazy. You know, one of the craziest stories. That was, I actually thought I was going to die then. You know, it was one of the times in my life I actually thought, this is it. I'm gone. You know, and coming off the back of that, massive lesson. You know, once again, I'd nearly died and I'd come close. Practical lessons, you know, I need to really concentrate on what I'm doing. I got really confident at that point. I'd walk big distances and I need to know where I'm going, what I'm doing, you know, stay by rivers, either stay by the river where there's water, or make sure I've got enough food for this certain leg, make sure I can go through communities where there's water, there's an accessible route, you know. And that was one lesson, practical lesson, but also about myself once again. You know, I'd survived, you know, I'd got myself out of that situation, and yeah, really grateful to be alive. You know, there's nothing worse than well, nothing more awakening than nearly dying and realizing it, and actually coming out the other side and saying, look, you know, you shouldn't even be here now, mate. You know, you're about to just, it was game over. But yeah, I think it was just, there was a lot. I learned a lot from that. And kidnapped in Mozambique, you know, once I got there, you know, I was obviously denied access into Mozambique because of civil war. And the reason being was because people were getting kidnapped and murdered, and it was a dangerous place to be. And I ended up going into Mozambique and I got kidnapped. You know, I was held in a room for several days, beaten by guys, and dragged across the ground. And it was, you know, it was really dangerous and really difficult, you know, mentally. You know, we're talking mentally here. You know, I was really sort of, yeah, which is why I have to be blasé now. You know, there's so much stuff that, you know, could have tipped me over the edge. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh God, this is happening, that's happening. But once again, I walked out of that. You know, I eventually managed to get out and hacked through the bush and got by the river and laid low for a few days to actually escape these people. Well, I say escape, you know, I managed to get out and go to the toilet. They let me go to the toilet, and I ended up just walking off early in the morning, hacking through the bush, you know, getting by the river. And coming out of that, you know, I sort of said to myself, look, these people are going through they've just been through a civil war. It's not a good environment to be walking through. You need to be careful. You need to think about where you're going. You need to avoid certain areas. You need to stay by the river. So I went from like avoiding the wild environment to staying near people in Zambia, to then avoiding the people in Mozambique and staying in the wild environments. You know, there was always like I say, a chess game or something where I had to avoid something or work out this piece of the puzzle. You know, how do I get through here, and what's the best technique? What's the best way of getting through this area? And yeah, I mean, there was so many difficult things. You know, even the Gambia, you know, we couldn't get access through the national park because there was lions everywhere and it's dangerous. And I ended up, the only way I got a permit to get through in the end was through the gold mining industry, which is what the charity managed to get me. You know, there's so much corruption and stuff in Africa, and a lot of the times all these big industries hold all the power over the governments, over everybody. You know, gold mine, anything like that. I could speak for days about the stuff that actually is not known about, that you know is obvious when you're there. And yeah, there's so much really. And Madagascar, I've just finished writing about some of that, you know, for a story, and that we basically spent the whole time we were there avoiding getting captured by armed bandits. You know, it was constantly wading through rivers, climbing through over mountain ranges, going from one river to another, escaping capture. You know, just sort of constantly on the move, constantly on edge. You know, really on edge. There was little heads with nooses drawn in the sand on the ground. It was you could make a good movie out of it. Actually, it was really fascinating walk, but it was dangerous, really dangerous. And I couldn't find anything out about the central core of Madagascar, you know, especially where we walked. There was little known about it, which is obviously one of the fascinations, was going through these areas where little is known and what's going to happen, you know, that element of it, that element of danger. And yeah, yeah, it was little known about it. So we were constantly, it ended up being very lawless, very sort of wild. And yeah, lucky to survive that once again. You know, getting through any of these expeditions, I always feel obviously happy that I've done it, you know, and grateful that I've succeeded in what I wanted to do. In if I had to have a selfish reason, and I say selfish because I don't like, I think of the journey as something obviously I want as a human being to do, a bit like a pilgrimage. You want a journey, etc. And there's no real objective other than to take on a journey. I don't necessarily want to be the first person to walk this river, do that. I just want to do something that's going to test me, and I want to do something that is unique and different, and it's going to tick them boxes as far as, like, I don't know what it's going to be like. It's going to be wild. It's going to be discovery. That's what it is for me. Exploration, discovery, and unknown. I really get excited by that, which I love doing. I love walking the UK's trails and doing stuff here, but my ultimate journey is to go somewhere where I don't know anything about. I'm going in and it's just exciting, ultimate excitement for me. But yeah, learned a lot of lessons, learned a lot about myself, and very grateful to be here today.
Geez, I feel exhausted just listening to that, and I haven't even got off my chair. It really does sound like it's really hard to fathom all of those experiences that you've been through. And without a doubt, you're going to have had a huge amount of time for self-reflection. And for me, it really speaks to your mental resilience. Do you think that that level of resilience that you have now is something that's innate, that's inbuilt, and you're just living it out? Or is it something that you find yourself cultivating and growing in throughout these trips that you venture onto?
I think it's something that's grown within me. I think even now I notice, when I was younger, I wasn't confident at all. Really wasn't. I really doubted what I could do, if you know what I mean. And there was always that element of, like, I can't do that. I don't feel like even now I get that sometimes. It's so easy to knock my confidence down that I definitely, like everyday life, someone will say, oh, you're not quite suited to that. And I'll probably say, yeah, I don't think you are. But I know within me I can do anything. Anyone can do anything they put their mind to. And I think on an expedition, I've got to the stage now where I've done so, I've been through very, very difficult situations, that resilience is probably at the top of its game, if you know what I mean, with that industry. But, and that sort of confidence with that, I can walk into a wild environment. I'm not worried at all about what might happen, or, the possible dangers. But yeah, I think it's something that is developed over time for me. I sometimes see that someone that's got it, and maybe it's just natural, but I don't think having a natural resilience is the same for me. I think that sometimes it can be a bit fake sometimes, if it's not natural, if it's not been developed over time. It can be something that maybe isn't quite true, because I've seen that, there's people that say, oh, and then that you get in there and they're not quite as confident as they thought they were. But yeah, I don't know. Resilience. How do you feel about resilience? Is something growing over time, or?
Yeah, I do think so. Maybe it's like a scale and we can slide up and down. But I also think we can be mentally resilient in one area, but in others less so. Like, there's some things that continuously knock us, and there's other things we can rise to and stand up against or with. So yeah, basically I would say I'm on the same line as you, that something that can be cultivated and built upon. And I guess as well, I don't know what you think, but I think a lot of resilience is about proving to yourself that you can. It's that saying, you can't eat an elephant in one go. You have to take those bites and work through it. And I think as you go through that journey, that's how your resilience builds, because you realize you can do particularly hard tasks, especially when they're broken down. And then that thought process of, oh yeah, I'm stronger than I thought, or I'm more capable than I thought. Yeah, it's a subject I'm really interested in, actually. I think it definitely could be a podcast series in itself, hey?
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Podcast, you can just do one subject, which sometimes I guess people do, but you could just spend the whole thing talking about resilience, and it would turn into a good conversation.
Totally. So bringing this background to the subject I'm really keen to get onto, which is environmental conservation, and that being particularly important to you. Where does that passion come from for you? And A big question to add on the end there. Is there anything you can share that might come as a surprise to listeners, wherever they are in the world, that you've encountered on your treks and expeditions around the world?
So the question as far as like how I got involved with it first, and then what? So yeah, I think like once again, I think like with the end of my expeditions, my 8 years of travel, I actually started to focus more on wildlife conservation and being involved with it. And I think that's when the passion actually grew for realizing that that is what I really felt strongly about, as far as like, I think I'd seen a lot at that point as well. I'd seen devastation and I'd learned a lot about the loss of rainforests and the species dying out in different areas. And I'd heard so many stories that I felt quite demoralized and beaten up by it, that it was something that I feel like I had to sort of move forward into in a way for my own self, my own sanity, my own sort of moral conscience that I wanted to try and do something. I mean, I didn't have a clue at that point how I was going to tie it in. And it was only when I planning the Zambezi that I decided, well, someone said to me, because I was just going to do a walk. I wasn't going to do it for any reason but other to take on a wild journey, and that was it. That was all I wanted. And someone said to me, well, you're doing a big walk, why don't you do it for charity? And he says, is there anything you're passionate about? I said, well, the only thing well, it's not the only thing, but the main thing I'm passionate about is wildlife, and conservation, and obviously these things that are happening out there. And they said, well, I can't remember who said it now, but then then obviously that triggered something that, maybe I should do it for wildlife. And I researched several wildlife charities and which one would be the best to do it for. And I ended up doing it for the David Shepherd Wildlife Foundation, firstly, and that one was, I've raised a couple of thousand. I think it's out of everything I've done, I find fundraising difficult. I think for me, even like social media, I find more and more difficult nowadays. I feel like I'm just slowly moving away from it, but realizing that we actually probably need it to promote ourselves and whatever it is. And I feel like that was the side where I'm trying to fundraise. I didn't feel like I wanted to keep pushing it out, and I'm constantly like, oh, this. I found that bit really difficult. I didn't find that was a strong point of mine. So if I'd have been more set on that, maybe I'd have raised a lot more funds. But I found my bigger aim was to research out there, and I could research what is actually happening on the ground and have that information in me as well. Not to say I've spread it around in certain sectors, but it's definitely stuff that maybe I should write about at least. And the industries, like I say, with the corruption, that's always a real grey area that's difficult to talk about. And I witnessed firsthand elephants that had been massacred and tusks had been sawn off, and people asking me about buying ivory, people sort of trying to sell me ivory, people sort of talking to me about the people that actually do the industry, the people behind the scenes, the Chinese, I probably shouldn't mention stuff like that, but there's a lot of real corrupt industries in Africa, especially along the Zambezi. There's a lot of money exchanging hands behind the scene, and there's reasons why roads are being built by different countries in different countries, and there's reasons why these ivory and these horns are getting out of these countries into different areas through corrupt governments and highways and byways. And there's a lot of dodgy stuff going on, but as you can imagine, it's really difficult to speak about it, and it's always something that probably be seen as being false to a lot of people because it's not known about. And there's some real brutal statistics out there, and even like looking at the basics, like 97% of elephants have been killed in the last 100 years. That population, you got like 3% left. That's probably even less now, that statistic. It's just the rhinos, how many species are left now? There's hardly any. And every year you'll hear of a massacre, you'll hear of species dying out. In Madagascar, you've got the rainforests have shrunk beyond belief. There's think 250,000 endemic species in Madagascar, and they're they're shrinking, and there's nowhere for them to live. The forests have gone. The whole central core of the forest have been stripped down. There's 90% of people use charcoal for cooking, and this means forests are going down all the time. There's not enough forests. There's not enough forests for the people, and there's certainly not enough forests for the wildlife. And there's not enough stuff happening. People are trying. Obviously, there's always positives. People are trying to help, but the reality behind the scenes is it's scary. I mean, it's real scary that humans, obviously the population's growing, that's one thing, but then we're encroaching onto wild environments all the time. We're building where there's human wildlife conflicts that these migratory routes that elephants have always taken are now blocked. And there's animals getting killed. They're seen as pests, which you can understand from a human aspect. There's animals are coming in, they're ruining your crops. They're potentially dangerous. They are very dangerous, but at the same time, where do they go, and what's left for them? And the answer seems to be they get killed, or we're more concerned with ivory or rhino horns or nonsense that doesn't mean anything. It says it's for like Chinese medicine and all this business, but as we all know, it's the same as like fingernails and stuff like that, keratin or what it's called. But it's just an old, traditional, I don't know. These are all sort of dated things, but we're not looking at the reality of actually there's not enough of these animals left to stay with these old traditional medicines and whatever it is. Even like, we're talking tiger hands and all that, whatever it is, and give it ashtrays, and it's just nonsense, absolute nonsense. And we already know about the pollution in the waters, and the dredging of the rivers, and the industry in the ocean, as far as the pollution goes. It's just, it's barbaric. Yeah, we all know that. And I think this is why, all these reasons I'm amplifying are why I teamed my expeditions up with wildlife, because for me, the wild environments are the wildlife. You know what I mean? That's their home. We obviously visit. Like I say at Bushcraft, we're visiting their home, and it's their environment. We've moved out of that environment years ago with human beings, which is in a way why I want to be back to living in a natural way, because I want to be like maybe the ancestors were. Where we relied on the land. We didn't rely on exploiting stuff, or we didn't. I want the ultimate natural way to live, and this is why I'm here. And yeah, I'd like the wildlife to be back, or to be thriving in the wild environments. I'd like more forests in the world. I'd like I think the main aim is partly to leave stuff alone, but also we've got to try and reverse. We've got to plant more forests. We've got to educate people on why we need these environments, because people don't know. Most of the time they're just too caught up in whatever it is they're doing, and which is fine. We're in a hectic world, but at the same time, we're not answering any of these problems. And if we are, it's all through politics, and it's all through corruption, and it's all nonsense for the most part,
Jeez, yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I find there are times where this stuff really keeps me awake at night. And, yeah, sure, some days I can keep on top of it, but other days it's like the ultimate face plant. To feel so powerless is an exceptionally uncomfortable feeling. But it is an illusion, we're not powerless. We can make decisions, empowered decisions every single day. It's that classic vote with our note. And, yeah, sure, some people will argue that it's too late, or individual actions don't matter, they're too insignificant. And then other people argue the exact opposite, and it can just be so stressful. So I'm a big believer in sort of finding your own path in this. What can you give? How can you serve? What ways can you show up or sacrifice even for the longevity of the natural world and people living on the planet? I suppose it's all about awareness and that consciousness that we can cultivate. But you know, many of the issues that you've mentioned there are overseas, they're international, and we're both tuning in from the UK here for this conversation. So let's talk practicalities now. Like, you know, we're talking about these big animals and these big landscapes and biomes and environments. Like, what can we do here in the UK to contribute to the protection of these places? And also, what would the loss of them do to affect us as well?
I think if we think back, we're very hypocritical as a nation, aren't we? Because what we're blaming other countries for, we've done ourselves. You know, the UK was probably covered in forests several hundred years ago, and we've stripped them down. You know, that's obviously one thing that we're sort of, you know, well, I'm conscious of it, but you know, even up here in the northeast, there's very little forests, and I think having an aim to plant more trees, plant more forests, look after the rivers and the environments, the oceans, and it's got to start from home, hasn't it? Obviously, and I think the way I am obviously passionate about. I think for me as well, I've travelled a lot, and I've always questioned the fact that I don't feel like I've got my own culture, you know, and I'm always like, well, I'm just a human, and I don't really feel like I'm part of anything. I think I'm a part of the world, and I feel like I could point any country out and sort of comment on what they do and stuff like that. I think for me, Africa, there's a lot of iconic species that stand out, and I think the actual devastation of that country is always what stands out and what's happened. And you know, it's difficult to sort of blame people, and obviously over time this is what's going to happen. But the UK, you know, I think we should reintroduce species. You know, I'm a big fan of that. You know, I'm happy about reintroducing beavers and just all the stuff that's died out. Even, I mean, it's a very complex situation, isn't it? You know, and I think for me, I'd love to see more wild environments, less agriculture, and I love more focus on to rewild. You know, there's a strong emphasis on that in Scotland, I know, and rewilding the rivers, the riverbanks. You know, get the natural way of being along them, and see more fish, see more sort of wild animals along the rivers, and see more natural. I mean, I eat meat, but I went through a stage of not eating meat for a very long time, very conscious of it, and I try and only eat anything that's organic. You know, it doesn't. I'm always annoyed with myself for eating meat anyway. So there's a part of me which feels like I shouldn't, and I'm sure a million people would say that, which is it's a battle I have against myself, you know, with that side of it. And there's so many question marks. If it was up to me, we'd just leave everything alone, set everything free, and we just get on with it. You know, we just be good people, you know, and treat every single creature on the planet in the same way we want ourselves treating. You know, everything's got its own life, hasn't it? And why should we be the dominant species that expects more and destroys everything? Because that's what we're doing. You know, it's all human beings do day in, day out, is destroy stuff. And even on a small scale, you know, we'll have something from a shop, we'll have plastic packaging, it's going somewhere. You know, we're all damaging the environment non-stop, and we don't mean to. You know, there's certainly a lot of us that don't mean to. Well, people probably deep down don't mean to at all, but to try and reverse that is such a complex subject, isn't it? And to be able to sort of, I think it's difficult to talk about it as well, because everyone's got a different view on everything, haven't they? And it's always so controversial. And it's easy to be a hypocrite as well, you know, and sort of say, oh, we shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And I think what I've done here on the land is I've tried to take myself out of all of this division, and just concentrate on myself and think, right, I'm going to plant trees, I'm going to grow food, I'm going to look after my surrounding area, I'm going to be part of my community, and I want that to reflect hopefully on others that maybe think, right, there's more to life than consuming and materialism and being you know, not part of the environment, if you know what I mean, because we are a part of the environment. We're a natural creature who is part of the environment, and we're not above it. So why we feel we need to destroy it is confusing to me. I've probably not answered the question really, but
Yeah, you have, but I think it is a very tricky one, because it's so multi-dimensional, so multifaceted. There is no one prescriptive answer because everybody's living so differently, and folks' level of environmental education or consciousness is different based upon our upbringings and our environments and our own personal interests. So I think it's about finding that common ground, but honestly, I think it's hard because you have to bring the truth to the table, which is often quite harrowing and depressing, the statistics, whether it's for meat consumption or climate change or soil erosion or whatever it is, it's frightening. But in order for that educational step to happen, it has to be talked about. And that's the only way that positive change can sort of come about starting. And I don't know about you, but I sort of just feel like a very negative person because, again, for that education, you have to talk the truth, and the truth is often bad. Like, I'm a big believer in positive news and sharing of success stories, but they're not always the things that drive action. The pace of change that we're seeing is not as fast, it's not matching or running parallel to the pace of destruction. I started my career in filmmaking in environmental conservation, and it just drained me because everybody's got an opinion and you sort of feel like you're preaching to the converted. So what you're doing in owning your space and your story and your life is a massive deal, because you're not just wasting your time locking horns with somebody and arguing and shouting from the rooftops. Like, you're just cracking on with it. It's a very simple but honest existence. I just find it a really admirable thing to do, and perhaps it just speaks to the explorer in you to just crack on with it. It's brave, and I think if we all had the courage to do that, then the world would certainly look a little bit different to how it looks today.
I think a lot of the times, there's so many things you can concentrate on, isn't it? Obviously, you might have someone in their family who's got a disease, or someone's got like an illness, or there's a certain problem in the area. Everyone's got some problem, which will stop them worrying about the environment as well. The environment is obviously the everything. If that's gone, we're all gone in a way. But then, because everyone's all so caught up, even now I've got this hernia, and that's playing on my mind all the time. And someone like some of my family are ill, and all these things are on my mind all the time. But at the same time, you then feel like, can I be really preaching to people about other stuff? Because it's like, how important is it to on them scale? I know for me it's most ultimate importance, but I get drained by trying to tell people about stuff or trying to highlight stuff, and I'm very aware that it's not on everyone's priority list, with all these other things that are happening, especially what's happened in the world recently, and that for me has buckled my career as such. It's made me completely choose different paths and made me want to sort of not hide away, but also just concentrate on what I feel is right, and obviously do my own thing, and hoping, like I say, that other people can find their way that is natural and good. I'm not saying I'm a good, great person, but within myself, I feel like I'm doing what's right, and I feel like, hopefully I can reflect on others, and they can do what they feel is right, and then they can do what they feel is right. But there's so much other stuff happening that it's difficult. Even like wars, got wars going on, and it's all man-made. It's all destruction, and if we could just stop and just be natural, and it's never going to stop, is it? But we can see that other stuff's going on that's so difficult to prioritize wildlife and prioritize conservation, isn't it? When it's all this other stuff. I remember one person, actually, I asked them about, when I was doing the Zambezi, raising money for wildlife. I got an email, like a Facebook message off one person saying, do you mind not sharing that? I'm not interested in it at all, like wildlife. And they goes, I'm more interested in, they said something else, like cancer or something. It's just, yeah, it's obviously a bad thing, but obviously I wasn't asking that person specifically to donate, and I was obviously just sharing the page, little things like that. You know, you can obviously see what they're saying, but at the same time, you're like, well, it's demoralizing. How am I supposed to try and do this if I'm getting silly little remarks like that? And obviously, I'm not on the same page as that person, and I don't think they'll ever be on the same page as me. You know, and they'll never have the same sort of aims as me. But yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is tricky. So as we begin to wrap this thing up, I'm slightly conscious of your time. It says on your website that you offer survival training. Is that something you're still doing here in the UK?
Yeah, well, I am, but at the moment I've took this bit of a break this year. I'm sort of giving it a bit of a rest for this year. Then maybe next year I'll get back to doing that. And I think what I've tried to do here is try to base myself in the area for the year and do some work and concentrate on the land, you know. And then next year I'm thinking of getting back into the stuff I was doing, you know, last year. Even I think the pandemic and all that obviously once again is an effect on how I've changed and shifted what I do. And but yeah, I think last year I did walks across the national parks whilst teaching expedition survival skills, and this year I was going to do the same with islands, but I didn't. I did the Orkney and Shetland Islands in January, and the aim was to continue doing that, but I decided to take a different route. There's a few different reasons, you know, and my partner, who also is coming over to live here off grid, she's like, we both bought the land and we both obviously set out to do this project together, and she's coming over this year as well to live. So I've got to start thinking about obviously making a home here and doing something in the area where she can be involved, and we can set a life up here in that sense. And but I think next year, once she's here and she's happy and we've got a system going, then I might go back to doing some training and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm very flexible. I mean, I've been doing a lot of writing recently as well here, and I wouldn't mind even like working for some organisations next year. Maybe go back to Outlook again for a while and do some expeditions. And but yeah, there's a few sort of little paths I'm trying to set out on at the moment. Little roles that I might start doing soon, but I can't mention too much. I can't mention it because I don't want to jinx it really. So there's a few little things that I might start doing soon that I'm hopeful of starting, but I'll still do survival training. And I'm probably not. This is what my weakness is, selling point. I can't sell myself. Can I? Well, he's not sounding very confident about this. But yeah, the actual training is my passion, you know, and trying to teach other people to survive and try and teach them all this stuff I talked about, this natural wanting to do a journey and what you need to do it, you know, the practicalities of it. That is what I want to do via the training courses. So when I do eventually do them again, I would love people to get involved and join me, you know, and hopefully I can pass on my knowledge that I've gained over these years, and yeah, hopefully they can walk away from them courses doing the same thing, you know, and doing their own extreme adventures.
Well, count me in. I expect an Instagram message when they are up and running, and I will be
Oh,
there.
right. Yeah. You're welcome.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, the way we wrap up these episodes is with our quick fire questions. So my questions are quick, but your answers don't have to be. So are you ready to jump in with question number 1?
Yeah. I like these snappy things.
All right. So question 1, what was the last book that you read and loved?
I'm reading a Richard Burton explorer book at the moment called Journeys to the Source of the Nile. Actually really interesting, but I've not finished reading it. One I read before. I'm really bad at reading. What did I read before that? Oh, can't even remember the title now. Out of Darkness, Shining Light. It's about the slaves. They were David Livingstone, Susie and Tuma, the two. They were his companions. They were freed slaves, but at the time it was slavery. And all of the people, the story is based on the people and their journey to carry David Livingstone's body once he died across Africa, obviously in a time when it was insane in Africa. And the book, what was the name? someone Gupta, her name is. She's a Zimbabwean lady who wrote the book, and it's a really interesting story. It's based on true stories, but it's based on the from the eyes of the slaves, the companions of David Livingstone, and it's a really interesting book. Out of Darkness, Shining Light. That's what it's called. And yeah, it's about the journey from carrying his body across Africa in the 1800s. You know, and it's really interesting.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. All right, second question. Are you a morning or an evening person?
I like to think of everything, really. I don't think there's a time when I don't feel like I'm all right. You know, I think mornings, I'd say more so. The reason being is I just feel like it's very calm in the morning. I like mornings. I like the calmness. I like just, there's no real stress in my mind in the morning, but the later throughout the day, the more stuff gets built up, doesn't it? You know, whether it's in where you're out and about or in yourself, you like, or you get more. But I think I'm pretty neutral all day. I'm all right. I'm all right anytime. But I think I'm not.
Is that resilience? Is
Yeah,
it?
the resilience. But I'd say mornings I like just sitting outside watching the birds. You know, I don't know, just drinking a cup of tea. You know, it's something nice about a morning. It's like a new day as well, isn't it? You feel like you've actually you're alive again. You've got this other day ahead of you, and there's like, yeah, that's what, that realization in the morning that you've got another day. Let's do it. You know.
Oh, that's great. I like that a lot. Okay, question 3. If you were an ice cream flavor, what flavor would you be?
Oh, ice cream flavor. Right. Not a massive ice cream. I like the white chocolate magnums as my favorite, so I'll go for the white chocolate because I'm not probably, it's probably a boring one, but I'm not a massive ice cream person, but yeah, let's go for the white chocolate.
Ah, white chocolate. I like that. We've not had one of those before. Okay, question 4. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
When I was growing up, when I was a youngster, I think, I don't even know. Like say before, I didn't necessarily have a real objective. I knew I wanted to do something with animals, you know, work with animals potentially, or travel. And yeah, I guess it all developed into pretty much what I've done in a way. And archaeology was also something I'm fascinated with, which is something I'm dipping into a bit now, is more of like a hobby, you know, real interested in that, history and archaeology and stuff. And but yeah, these were all little things that I think it was all based on, you know, Indiana Jones, or you know, any kind of all these things you'd watch as a kid. That's like, oh, I want to do that, I want to do that, or superhero, or whatever, isn't it? Yeah.
That is so cool. I like that. All right, question 5. What is your most unusual talent?
Unusual talent. Surviving in dangerous environments. I don't know if I've got any real. It's just one thing I struggle with at bushcraft. You know, when you have to get up, they got the Tribe's Got Talent thing. I never really had a talent that I felt, you know, it was maybe storytelling in a way to what I've done, you know, which I don't think is a talent. I think it's just something that I've learned to do because I've done a lot. But I don't think, yeah, I can juggle. Um, yeah, I guess that's a good talent in a way. But yeah, I don't know if I could do like the basketball through the legs, where you know when you change your legs like that, and the basketball between. I can do. I used to be really obsessed with that. I can
Nice.
skateboard as well. I used to skateboard as a kid. But there's a few things.
Well, there's a good array there, so that's something to be proud of. Okay, next question. Who has inspired you the most in your life?
Um, this is a question I struggle with as well. I think it was always, like say, past explorers. Maybe David Livingstone seems to hold a big sort of thing on my mind. You know, there's a lot of research I've done with him. I think the fact that he was one of the people that was classed as having triggered off the end of the slave trade, and there was a lot of good to do with him, as well as being an explorer. Obviously, it's a time when it would have been difficult, you know, and there was a lot of stuff going on that was very, very bad, obviously, and very messed up. But there was select people back in them days where I think they stood out as far as trying to change and trying to be a person that was, you know, trying to like flip it around and change it. And I think David Livingstone was one, you know, that for me felt like he was doing that and felt like he was more than just an explorer. He had a love for it, and he had a sort of passion for it, and he had a sense of doing good whilst he was doing it. You know, a lot of other explorers would have gone into the area and just killed people and been barbaric, which is what happened in them days. And I think he stands out. If I had to have, you know, someone to name who's famous in a way, and David Attenborough's always been, you know, as a kid, I've watched him from years, you know, as far as how he tells stories and how he sort of has, you can see he's got the passion as well. He's not just, he's dedicated his life to it, you know, and as far as trying to do it, you know, you can imagine him on his deathbed, his last wish will be, which is his wish since he's been born has been to save the planet, you know, and there's not many people that you can say that about. So he's definitely one who's inspired me. And yeah, I'll leave it with them too, I think.
Powerful, powerful, man. Okay, so when you're 80 years old, what will matter to you the most in your life?
I think what will matter to me is knowing that have you ever seen the film Revolutionary Road? I watched that last night, and it's about people that don't live their life when they want to live their life. Naturally, they want to live their life and they want to have a wholesome life, but they don't do it. And I think knowing that I have lived my life the way I wanted to and naturally, and if I look back on it and I'm happy that I've done that, then that will be the main thing for me. As an older person, I think obviously being good and being true, and there's all these aspects, but I think having lived my life how I felt I wanted to live my life, and yeah, I think that would be the main thing.
Nice. Okay, next question. What is your favorite food?
Food. I eat very healthy at the moment, but I do like pizza. I'll probably say pizza. Yeah, quite like a nice pizza. I think anything melted cheese is pretty good. I've got a sweet tooth as well, so I do like cheesecake. That always sticks out as being. But I do eat healthy most of the time. You know, I'm eating a lot of vegetables and trying to turn as organic as I can. Obviously, grow my own food eventually and stuff like that. But if I have to be bad, I'll have pizza and a cheesecake as a dessert.
Oh gosh, we all love a good treat, don't we? Okay, penultimate question. What is your favorite outdoor space?
Outdoor space. I think I've got a shared passion for all outdoor spaces, like forests, rivers, you know. I'd say forests and rivers and mountains are in the same favorite category for me. I'd say if I'm in an environment that contains all three, then I'm very happy. You know, forested, mountains, and rivers, then I'm happy. But you know, I love the ocean. I love desert. I love everything really.
Ideal. Good stuff. Okay, final question. Are there any catchphrases or mantras that you live your life by?
I think I'd have to make one up, but I don't think there's like a specific one that I'd. You know, I was going to say a minute ago, like about the 80-year-old man. Who, I'm talking about me, obviously, in 10 years. The 80-year-old man who's, yeah, if I could look back, you know, and imagine my life being a book, how would I want it to be? Them sort of things, you know. I don't want like a cheesy quote, but that sort of thing, you know, where I can, life's a book, blah, 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 you know, or just, I like, I'm not necessarily religious, but I like Buddhism and I like even elements of Christianity and stuff. I like anything that's about your spiritual self and about looking deeper than just surface level. You know, maybe we can just see things, but maybe there's other stuff happening that we can't see. I'm very aware of that in my own mind, that there's other powers in the world. I'm not to say this is like a mantra, but I'm just aware of looking beyond what might be not be there. That's my quote. That's a good quote. Quote that, isn't it? Long-winded.
Yeah. Very good. Short and simple. Does the job. Well, listen, Chaz, it's been so good diving into all these different subjects with you. So multi-dimensional, 3D, 4D even. What have we got out there now? 5G. This has been a great 5D conversation. 5G, yeah. I know. Not a ride to be fair, but there we go. Yeah, and to wrap this up, I love it if you could leave the listeners with some information on where they can find out more about what you're up to.
Yeah, so most 90% of stuff I do is on Instagram. It's The Wildest Journey, Chaz Powell, or The Wildest Journey on Instagram. You'll find me there. And the only other thing I've got, well, the website is thewildestjourney.com. I've written some stuff on there, and I've got a lot of platforms on there and a lot of links on there to stuff. And also a page called Wild Bear Croft on Instagram, which is about the land. That's also on it. Yeah, on my actual The Wildest Journey page, there's a link to the Wild Bear Croft page on there. And but yeah, I use other stuff. Facebook and Twitter I've gone away from a little bit, but I still have pages on there that I update sometimes. And like I say, I've gone a bit lazy with social media in a way, and I know that it's important. But I think part of my sort of objective is maybe moving away from it more and more over time. I don't know, but yeah, The Wildest Journey in Instagram, I'll always post little stories and whatnot. But
well, Chaz, listen, it's been such a pleasure. I hope you recover quickly, you look after yourself, and hopefully see you out on the trail sometime.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you. Hopefully.
Nice one. Take care, mate. Speak soon.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Well, there we go. What did I tell you? Absolutely inspirational. What a wonderful person Chaz is, and I really enjoyed this conversation with him. I hope that it has left you feeling ready to up your game when it comes to getting outdoors and having purposeful adventures, whatever that looks like. Remember, adventure is an attitude. It's a way of approaching life. And I just hope that this conversation has inspired you to go out and grab more adventures. So before we sign off, I just want to say a massive thank you to the Patreons within my community who are subscribed to the producer tier. These are the people who are really helping me to produce content and get this stuff out there to your screen so that you can listen wherever you are. So initially, a massive thank you to Rachel Lawrence, to James Gordon, to Stephen Herbert, and to Simon Woodburn. Thank you all for your support, and thank you to all of my Patreons as well. That is the way that I'm keeping these podcast episodes ad-free. They're completely powered by the community. So if you'd like to join my community, you can head to patreon.com/spend more time in the wild. Have a look at the different tiers. We've got all sorts of different things going on there, from gear that you can win to fireside events that you can join to, of course, featuring as a producer at the end of these podcast episodes and the films that I create on YouTube as well. So for now, that is all from me. Thank you for tuning in, guys. We will see you next week. And until then, stay wild.